Hello, and welcome to the Infectious Disease Podcast from Clinical Care Options. I'm your host, Jennifer Blanchette. Today's episode is the second in a short series titled Steps to the Future, Present and Future of PrEP, featuring expert insights on recent and ongoing advances in HIV pre-exposure prophylaxis. During this episode, Dr. Colleen Kelley from Atlanta, Georgia, discusses key features and available safety and efficacy data on investigational long-acting HIV PrEP strategies that are in late stages of clinical development. For more information about Dr. Kelley and for a link to additional educational content from this program, including downloadable slides, please visit the show notes for the episode. Now let's get started and hear what Dr. Kelley has to say about emerging long-acting PrEP options.
Hello, my name is Dr. Colleen Kelley. I'm an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm here today to review emerging long-acting PrEP options. So we are in an amazing place in HIV prevention for the landscape in the future. We currently have oral daily PrEP, which is highly effective, greater than 99% effective when taken every day at preventing HIV infection. And this really revolutionized HIV prevention when it was approved back in 2012. Folks can also use it on demand in the 2-1-1 dosing regimen that is supported by the WHO guidelines. And these are really excellent tools for HIV prevention. However, they don't work for everyone. And we have many, many options that are emerging that may be approved in the coming years, and those that are future options that are coming down the pike. So emerging options that we'll talk about today, including the intravaginal ring, as well as injectable pre-exposure prophylaxis, and then other options that are coming in the future that we won't cover today, things like implants and long-acting antibody infusions and different dosing regimens for different oral regimens. Why do we need different options for folks? And the truth of the matter is the daily pill is not suitable or desirable for everyone. More options for people means that more people are likely to utilize these prevention interventions. We've seen with birth control, when different types of options, pills, injections, implantables are offered to women, they will choose what works well for them. The same thing can be translated into PrEP. An individual will choose the PrEP modality that works best for them. And so as many options as we can possibly present to people will only mean an increase in uptake of PrEP and reductions in HIV incidence. So late last year and this year, we heard the amazing efficacy results for long-acting cabotegravir from the HPTN 083 and 084 trials. These were randomized, double-blind, phase 2B and 3 trials that were conducted internationally. HPTN 083 was conducted among MSM, men who have sex with men, and transgender women at increased risk of HIV infection, and enrolled over 4,500 people. HPTN 084 was conducted among sexually active cisgender women who were also at increased risk of HIV infection, and over 3,200 women were enrolled into that study. The design of the study was a bit complicated. It was double-blinded. There was an oral lead-in period that lasted about a month before participants progressed to the injectable period, where they got cabotegravir or a placebo every 2 months, and they got oral TDF-FTC or placebo that they were to take on a daily basis. When folks' efficacy was established or people stopped injectable cabotegravir, they were covered with oral TDF-FTC for an additional year for the PK tail, or the pharmacokinetic tail, where drug levels are declining but still present in the body, and we are concerned for the development of HIV resistance. The primary endpoint was incident HIV infections as well as adverse events. And what we saw from these studies, both amazing results. Long-acting cabotegravir met superiority criteria over TDF-FTC in both studies, which was just astounding. In the HPTN 083 study, there were 12 infections in the cabotegravir arm and 39 infections in the TDF-FTC arm. In HPTN 084, there were only 3 infections in the cabotegravir arm and 36 in the TDF-FTC arm. Overall, these were superior. Cabotegravir was shown to be superior to oral TDF-FTC with a hazard ratio of 0.32 in the 083 trial and extremely low in the 084 trial hazard ratio of 0.08. Really just amazing. And so when we look at the 12 infections that occurred in HPTN 083, they kind of fell into 4 buckets. The first group of folks were people who were shown to be HIV positive at baseline, and that is in group group A in this slide. In group B, those were people with non-adherence and were shown to be HIV positive after a prolonged hiatus from cabotegravir. In group C were 3 infections that were found during the oral lead-in phase. And finally, the most concerning are the 4 infections that did occur in people with apparent adherence to injectable cabotegravir. And what we've seen in the HPTN-083 trial is that INSTI resistance or integrase inhibitor resistance can occur in people who seroconvert in the setting of high cabotegravir concentrations. And so that is something we are learning more about. We also found in this trial that HIV detection or determining who's seroconverted while on injectable cabotegravir can be complicated with routine diagnostic assays. It can be delayed, it can have some confusing results, and that is also something that we are learning more about. In the HPTN-084 trial, just those 4 infections, 1 at baseline was excluded per protocol in the analysis. 2 occurred in the absence of cabotegravir, and only 1 infection in the presence of cabotegravir, although with some extended dosing intervals that were seen. In this study, they did not show major integrase inhibitor resistance mutations, but again, the diagnostics can be difficult in the setting of injectable cabotegravir and likely pre-exposure prophylaxis in general. And so that is something that we are learning more about as the science developed. Injection site reactions and weight change were the 2 major events of note in both of these studies. You'll see that in HPTN-083, the prevalence of injection site reactions was much higher than in HPTN-084, 80.9% versus 32% in the cabotegravir arm. However, this resulted in very few people actually discontinuing the medication due to injection site reactions, about 2% in HPTN-083. There were weight changes that were seen, particularly when first initiating cabotegravir, about 0.42 kilograms that was seen. Overall, though, for the duration of the study, weight changes were about the same across treatment arms. So when we think about implementing injectable medications for PrEP, long-acting medications, and what these are, these long-acting medications will allow for less than daily dosing, which is something that some people really, really like, the ability to not have to worry about taking something on a daily basis. This could be on a weekly basis, a monthly basis, every 6 months, maybe with some products that are in development. And so really, it's very exciting to think about the options that folks will have available to them. But we have to think about how to deliver these injectable agents in our clinical programs. Could pharmacies deliver these shots? Folks should also have supply of oral formulations of drugs accessible to them if a shot is missed or if they decide to discontinue an injectable agent and they need to cover that long-acting pharmacokinetic tail. Will incentives or mobile vans help to deliver these agents? I think people are very excited about the possibilities of getting these medications out to folks who don't normally access clinical care with some of these novel delivery mechanisms. There has been one study that looked at implementation of long-acting cabotegravir plus rilpivirine. This was used for treatment, for antiretroviral treatment, but similarly, this key strategies that they identified would likely be applicable to pre-exposure prophylaxis. And that obviously good staff communication, teamwork, and the use of a web-based treatment planner was very helpful. And then as far as supporting patient adherence, really explaining that dosing window very clearly to participants or patients, effective appointment reminders, and designated staff who were tracking these patients also resulted in improved adherence. And that's something to take note of. Shifting gears a little bit now from injectable agents to talk about the dapivirine vaginal ring. This is the first female-controlled method of HIV prevention that allows women to insert a ring into the vagina that will deliver dapivirine over a 1-month period. It's a silicone ring that was developed by the International Partnership for Microbicides, or IPM. This is the first topical HIV prevention method that's been submitted for regulatory approval, and several countries in sub-Saharan Africa are actually reviewing it. In March of 2021, WHO released clinical recommendations that included guidance for using dapivirine among women at risk for HIV, and the agent has actually been submitted to the US FDA for regulatory approval, and a decision is expected hopefully by early 2022 for this prevention intervention. So multiple studies have given us some good information about the monthly dapivirine vaginal ring. The phase 3 clinical trials, placebo-controlled clinical trials, were called ASPIRE in the RING study. And those showed that HIV incidence was reduced about 30% in African women across both studies. There were no safety concerns based on long-term use, as well as in the open label extension. But it was noted that adherence may not have been as high as hoped in the clinical trials. Women found the ring to be acceptable and were interested in using it. We did get some updated data from the open label extension studies where women who did not seroconvert in the original clinical trials were allowed to use the ring in open label fashion. And interestingly, in both studies, based on drug levels from the returned rings, they were able to show much higher adherence in the open label extension than they were in the initial clinical trial. Most people think that this is because women are more likely to use a product that they know works after they know it works than in the clinical trial setting when you're not yet sure if it works or not. Incidence is estimated from these studies. While they did not have a placebo control group, but incidence of HIV is estimated to be reduced upwards of 50 to 60% based on the open label extension studies. And so these data are also very reassuring for the dapivirine ring. And so what does this mean? Options for the more than 1 million people who are eligible for PrEP in the United States are a very good thing. CDC estimates, as I said, that more than 1 million people are at increased risk of HIV infection. And the approval of injectable cabotegravir or potentially the dapivirine ring down the road will bring more options to people who need them for HIV prevention. This allows people to choose what's best for them, what's best for their sexual activity, what's best for their desire to engage with the medical establishment, what's easiest for them to access and use. But we also have to make sure that options are getting to the people who need them most. And we saw from 2018, my colleague from the School of Public Health showed that the prevalence of PrEP users did not match HIV incidence. And this is demonstrated by the figures at the right, showing highest use of PrEP in the West and potentially the Midwest and Northeast, but highest incidence of HIV in the Southeast, creating PrEP to need ratio disparities. And so it is upon us to ensure that those folks who need PrEP options the most have access to them at costs that are reasonable. So finally, when we think again about implementing long-acting PrEP options, we're still learning about how we can best do that. We're also still learning how best to monitor for incident HIV during use of PrEP. We talked about those extremely rare breakthrough infections with cabotegravir, but it's not clear at this point in time how we should be monitoring for those breakthrough infections. In the 083 and 084 open label extensions, they are implementing viral load monitoring for diagnostics. But I do think we need to take care because over-medicalization of monitoring, meaning adding on frequent testing with expensive tests like viral loads, is going to lead to reduced access and increased costs. And so that is something we need to keep in mind and see how this plays out as the data accumulate. We are also still, unfortunately, in the midst of a COVID pandemic, and we know that particularly in the early days of the COVID pandemic, that access and uptake to HIV prevention services was altered significantly. A lot of places shifted to telehealth and low-touch services. How this will be accomplished when we try to implement an injection, which would likely still require adherence to clinic visits at a minimum, at least in the beginning, remains to be seen. We know from data presented at IAS this last year that at least one clinic in the U.S. in the early days of the COVID pandemic in 2020, the HIV testing decreased by 85%, new PrEP starts decreased by 72%, active prescriptions decreased by 18%, and people lapsed refilling their PrEP prescriptions by 191%. Now, maybe this was just because behavior decreased during those days of lockdown and that things are rebounding back to normal now. But it still remains to be seen how HIV prevention services will continue to be delivered in the most effective way to the people who need them most. So thank you very much. With that, I will conclude this brief summary of PrEP and what is on the horizon. I think it's a very exciting time for pre-exposure prophylaxis and for HIV prevention interventions. And as I said, we will just need to continue to work hard to make sure that people most in need of HIV prevention services are able to access them.
Thank you very much for sharing those insights, Dr. Kelley. And thanks to our listeners for joining in. As a reminder, to view the full educational program, Steps to the Future, Present and Future of PrEP, on the CCO website, click on the link in the show notes. Please be sure to check back regularly for more episodes on important infectious disease topics. Thank you.